Zapraszamy do wysłuchania podcastu Diany Dąbrowskiej Kieślowski 2.0, czyli Nauka o filmie poprzez twórczość Krzysztofa Kieślowskiego. Zrealizowano w ramach stypendium Ministra Kultury, Dziedzictwa Narodowego i Sportu.
Kieślowski 2.0, Kieślowski 2.0. My name is Diana Dąbrowska. I'm a film expert and film critic and also the artistic director of the Kieślowski Festival in Sokołowsko. This is our first English episode of this podcast series, and I'm really thrilled, and it's an honor to present you our first international guest. His name is Leigh Singera. Leigh is an experienced film journalist whose work has appeared in many important newspapers, magazines, and online outlets, including The Guardian or The Times. He also worked for the BFI London Film Festival as a program advisor, and this is really important for our conversation, Leigh is an expert in video essays. He made some of them even including the site IndieWire.com, and I remember how mesmerized I was by his work when he was our main guest during the opening night of the Kieślowski Festival in 2019. I remember how Krzysztof Piesiewicz, Urszula Lesiak, and many film experts like Michał Oleszczyk or Michał Jaxa, also our guests in the podcast series Kieślowski 2.0, were really amazed by his amazing work and the essay Free Color Silver. And that when I was planning this series, I was like, I have to invite Leigh and not only ask him for his Kieślowski, his work that he's done on Kieślowski, his movies and so on, his philosophy, as you will see, but also about this form, which I found unique. And for me, this is somehow the future of film critics, video essays, film essays. So I'm really happy that I can invite you to hear our conversation. And I hope that you will be also interested in discovering more work from Leigh, also his site, leighsinger.com, where you can find, many videos, scripts, screenplays, or texts that he wrote in the past. So let's hear the conversation. Leigh, could you tell me about your first meeting with Kieślowski in terms of the movies that you saw in the past?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this. I think it was either. So in my sort of teenage years, when he was really coming to kind of be more and more kind of global attention, is when I first heard of him. And so I think I was probably in my teenage years when, around the time of The Double Life of Veronique, and maybe a short film about love, but the long version, so not the shorter version that's part of the Decalogue, because I didn't see the Decalogue until many years later. But I saw a short film about love, and I saw The Double Life of Veronique, probably very close in time, and both of them just amazed me. I was so taken by the way they were made, what they were talking about, the style, just everything. And it was really like a great discovery for me. It was like, suddenly I discovered this filmmaker he'd obviously been making films for many years, but then the point that you discover them at, for you, it's all new. And the great thing about discovering someone who's already had a long career is you have so many more things that you can go back and find. But those two films are probably, and I think they're interesting because they are quite different. I think Double Life of Veronique is much more towards the sort of three color style, and Short Film About Love is still, it's already moving in that direction, but it still is very much connected to his earlier films that are a bit more, dealing with day-to-day life in the world that he's investigating. So yeah, those two probably were my starting point with Kieślowski.
And before I ask you about your essay, I was wondering, how about the documentary stuff? Because
nowadays there is this feeling that maybe his documentary movies that he made in his early part of the career, they are still universal and they need to be rediscovered, and they are speaking to especially Polish audience about some paradoxes that are still relevant today for our society.
I would agree. I think his documentaries are still incredibly watchable and still incredibly relevant. I think with a lot of filmmakers who make documentary and fiction, if they get a lot of attention for their fiction films, it's easy for the documentaries to get a little bit forgotten, which is a shame. I'm thinking of people like, let's say, Werner Herzog or Wim Wenders. These are guys who do both, but there's something about maybe one or two of their fiction films that everybody suddenly, goes, that's the film that you have to see. And I think that definitely happened with Kieślowski in, his last few films. They made such an impact that it's easy to forget the documentary stuff. I personally hadn't seen any of the documentaries until much later. And probably some of them only when I started sort of working on, looking at the films in more detail. So even for me as a fan, I hadn't seen the documentary work until, a much later time. But when I saw them, I was like, yeah, these are great. And I think what's fascinating about him is you can absolutely see a kind of, a journey. You can see where he starts and where he ends. And even though some people say there's a very big difference, and there are some differences, I think that underneath it, there's a very strong consistency to the things he's interested in and the stories he wants to tell. And I think if you can see the documentaries, you get that becomes really clear.
Well, I was thinking of Paweł Kieślowski. He's also a person that we know, but he done amazing stuff before with documentary cinema, and he's really close to Kieślowski in that way. I was thinking. I remember your visit in the Hommage at Kieślowski Festival in Sokołowsko. I remember how proud of you was Krzysztof Piesiewicz, who was the guest of honor. It was the first day of the festival, and it was an amazing day because we were really, really happy to show to the Polish audience on the big screen your essay that, okay, it was possible to see maybe on internet, but on the big screen it had such another appeal, I would say. And Piesiewicz, friend of Kieślowski, long collaborator, said that it's amazing how a guy in the UK, after so many years, in this essay, in this short piece, told everything we wanted to tell with this trilogy of almost 6 or 7 hours. And it was so amazing. And I was thinking if you could tell me some of your memories from that magical, evening in Sokołowsko. It was 2 years ago. Yes, and Krzysztof Piesiewicz was really mesmerized by you and your work.
I mean, it's just to hear you say all of that stuff. It's almost like when I hear it, it's like you're talking about somebody else and someone else's project. I mean, for me too, of course, I had never seen it. I made it, but I'd never seen it on a big screen. And actually, I don't know if you remember, but I actually left the audio. I couldn't be there while it was on. It's because obviously my voice is in it the whole way through. And like many people, I'm no fan of hearing myself talk in public, never mind on a huge screen and stuff. I think it was a very special evening and actually, stay in Sokołowsko at the festival for me, because that was the first time that I do a lot of programming and I work for film festivals. So my regular job, part of it is introducing filmmakers to an audience and showing their work and then discussing it with them. And so I think I even said on the night, to be on the other side of that and suddenly someone is asking me about my stuff, it was just very surreal and very strange. But I mean, obviously a huge honor, and to be there with Krzysztof Piesiewicz and Mrs. Kieślowski and some of the other collaborators from his work.
Yes.
Have them watching that and discussing it. It didn't feel real. It felt a bit strange, because when you make these things with the internet now, you just put it out there and you really have no control. And I think that's a good thing. It's out there. People can discover it immediately. People can discover it years later. And you don't know who's going to watch it or when they're going to watch it. So when I heard from, I think you got in touch with me, Diana, but when you said that, the invitation to come and that Krzysztof Piesiewicz had seen it and was interested in showing it. This is just like, I don't even think I'd sort of dreamed about that kind of stuff, because it's a bit too scary to think that the people who made it or who were involved in making it watch it, because they might have very different ideas about than the ones you put forward. But to obviously hear that he was, he admired it and he wanted to show it. There's no really greater honor if you are interested in someone's work and you try and express why you feel it's important, and then somebody connected with that work says, yes, this is worth showing to other people. That's a kind of like dream scenario, and it's not something that I'd ever experienced before in that way. Right. So it was a crazy night, and it was just an enormous honor, and so lovely to meet so many of those people then, and obviously talk with them. Never mind talking about the video essay, but just to hang out with them and be together and sort of celebrate this amazing filmmaker. So it was a very special visit, and that night especially was a very special evening for me.
I forgot to mention that apart of Krzysztof Piesiewicz, also Urszula Lesiak, the editor of White, of Three Colors White, was also there, and she was also really mesmerized by the editing. And I mean, editing was such a huge part of Kieślowski work also, because he was writing the screenplays, the directing and stuff, but he was the happier when you heard his collaborators when he was in the editing room working at night till late, and this editing part, I mean, it's like the key, to success. I guess in your work when you do film essays. Please tell me, I mean, we are speaking about Three Color Silver. This silver element was from the beginning something very new to us. Why silver? And also I remember that from the beginning, like you're doing a comparison of the beginnings of every part of the trilogy, and showing, I mean, how everything is connected. It was such a great opening for an essay, and I was thinking how it all started, and how did you find the perfect narration to tell in such a short amount of screen time, this whole universe of Kieślowski's overture films.
Wow. Well, I mean, to go to the title first, I mean, that's just a very simple thing. It was basically 25 years on from from the first movie. So Three Colors Blue, which was 93, I think. So I made it in 2018. So it was 25 years on. I think for me, there were two reasons. One is these are three films that I absolutely love. And it's a filmmaker that I hugely admire, and I had never done, so I do quite a lot of video work, but I've never done anything on Kieślowski. So it felt like a really good time. So firstly, just to explore the films, because I think they're, masterpieces. The second thing, and this, again, I think it's in the video, I tried not to make it too big a thing, because I think I want people to have their own thoughts. But I was very concerned at the sort of political developments, certainly in this country where I live, in the UK, and Europe in general. And because those films, because they are sort of based around the French tricolor, ideals, and they very much look at modern Europe, or then modern Europe, so in the early 90s. For me, what was very interesting was to kind of use the films as a springboard to look at Europe as well. And without getting too overtly political and, trying to say, and this is what I think, and this is terrible, and this is right, but use the films to kind of say, well, this is what he was looking at with Europe. Where are we now? And I think that's actually not really to do with me. That's because the films are so strong that they stand up. And any film that puts out really interesting questions and ideas, if it's an excellent film, it has that longevity, and it can still be relevant 25 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years, 50 years time, people can come back at those films and say, that was Europe then. Where are we now? Is there anything in there that he was talking about that actually reflects our present day? So there were two kind of main ideas for me. But I think the playfulness, and I mean, I don't know, maybe we'll talk about this a bit more later, but for me to do a video piece rather than a written piece, you spend a lot more time with the films because they're there on your computer screen and you're playing with them basically. I mean, it's very lovely that you mentioned the sort of opening and putting the three films together on the screen. But to me, that's the strength of the video process. I could have written an essay. I mean, the scripts that I wrote, that I narrate, could be an essay, but actually it's not anywhere near as interesting without seeing the way that the director and the filmmakers have actually expressed this through visuals and through their own audio. And so that to me is the sort of the joy of making video work, because you're using the film itself, or the films in this case themselves, to try and discuss what it is you want to do. If you do a written piece, it's already, you've already changed art form or expression form, let's say. And, I started as a writer, so I've written many pieces that say, the shot where the camera starts as a wide and then moves in, but that's me describing it. And actually that's never going to be as effective or as interesting as watching that camera, move in. And then actually if I show it, I can write or say something different because I don't have to do the explanation of what I'm seeing. I can talk about it in another way. So those are sort of some of my, I mean, that to me, that's just general, video advantages that I find. But yeah, with these films, because they're a trilogy, because they're so beautifully constructed and there's so many connections across them, it just seemed obvious to me to kind of put those three things on screen at the same time, because then you can see each of those in a way that you obviously, even if you watch one film after another, like if you had a day of watching the Three Colors trilogy, you're not watching them simultaneously. You're watching one, then the next one, then the next one. So to do certain things where, I mean, the obvious example, like the old person who's trying to put the bottle into the bottle bank, and then that scene occurs in different ways in each film. So to put them together, then you can really look at how are they shot? What are the main characters? How are they reacting to this other character? And just, there's all sorts of advantages, I feel, in being able to, have the luxury to sort of have the films in front of you and play around with them. So yeah, I mean, it's a real, I don't mean to sound like too, deferential. It's a privilege, right? Because these are films that I watched first when I was, much, much younger, that I loved, and they make an impact on you. And now, many years later, you get to sort of play with them and, try and do something different with them. And that's something that's only, it's a recent development. People, even the best critics from 30 years ago, had no opportunity to do that. So I think we're in a very fortunate period of sort of analysis and criticism. And it's a real, with films like this, it's just an absolute joy to be able to do that.
Before I ask you more about the like how to construct a film essay, I was wondering if hearing from Kieślowski's interviews, because we also hear his voice, and even Piesiewicz is there in your essay, if there were some words of wisdom that were really like the key for the essay and also for your interpretation of modern Europe. If there was, something from Kieślowski that became really important for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One is, it was really important for me that it's not just my voice to be heard throughout the whole thing. And so fortunately, there are really good interviews, like audio and video interviews with Kieślowski and with Piesiewicz that were available, so that then I can use that. Because again, if someone else had made this, not me, I would be much more interested in hearing Kieślowski speak than me interpreting him. I mean, obviously, if I'm making it, you need to have some sense of what I think is important. But I think to mix that in with the filmmaker as well is, if you have that possibility, is really great. I think in terms of the ideas that I took from it, that I use in the video and I think are really important. For me, it's art in general, but certainly his films, this idea of connection and the idea of connecting actually in ways that we don't even really fully understand or can't see at that moment. I think that is such an important point to keep high up in our consciousness, because, I don't need to tell you that everything in the world at the moment seems so divided and so polarized. And it's like, it's not just we disagree, but now I can't be friends with you if you believe this. And if you're going to do this, then I will absolutely attack you. There's, the sort of common ground and discussion ideas seem to be just disappearing. And I feel that myself when I hear people who I profoundly disagree with politically or socially or whatever. I also am now like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you in my life. But actually, you have to question how useful is this? Because ultimately, if you think about the single biggest thing, which is like the climate change, right? The environment, which we are really, really in a dangerous position on. It doesn't matter what your political belief is or what your, social ideal is. If our planet is in danger, then we are all in danger. And so what connects us actually is so important to keep at the center of our world, as well as being, we have to be able to disagree, right? And if someone is pushing some very extreme ideology that you feel is going to, oppress or persecute a certain minority or a certain population, of course you have to stand up for that. But we also have to try and make connections. And I think Kieślowski's cinema is all about that. And, Three Colors, the way it ends is like, and it's obviously a terrible tragedy that he died so young and that was his final film. But to go out with that as your final sort of summary of the world, I think that's pretty amazing. And so the stuff where he talks about what connects us and not even being able to see it or understand it, but to feel that there's something beneath that. I think that those were the things that I found absolutely fascinating. And so it was important for me to include him saying those things within the video.
When there was this transition from the written word to film essay, how long did it took in your case? And when you are teaching people, how to work on images and put them together in new contexts and how to work with the tools, you as an expert, did you give some advice, that are important for this transition? Because we start when we are journalists or film critics from like working in the newspapers or the internet, and it's always like written word, and how to let go of it. So how it was in your case, and what kind of advice can you give, to a person that is like thinking about doing it, but is still like, oh, I have to know how to edit stuff and I need programs and stuff, and maybe it's much easier than we think to start.
It's a very good question. I think firstly, I still do both. So I still do quite a lot of writing as well as the video side of things. So for me, there's always this kind of constant juggling of one and the other. And I think that's actually quite useful because in my head, I haven't left written work behind. It's still something that's very present in my day-to-day work. I think with video, yes, of course, there's a certain level of technical, knowledge, right? In the first time you sit down and if someone shows you this is an edit system and, here's a clip and you put it on a timeline and you can cut it and you can, all of that stuff. I think I would say, firstly, don't be scared of that because actually the basics are fairly simple. I think people are so screen literate nowadays and so computer, but in most people's work has an element of computer, in it. And so I think people might be surprised how quickly they can pick up the basics. Now, of course, the thing with any of these systems, right, is there's so much complicated stuff you can do and sophisticated stuff. But actually, certainly for a lot of the work I do, I don't like it to get too fancy and too many effects and things, because I think then that takes away from the film. I'm not making a commercial, I'm not making an animation. I'm actually there, at least at the moment, my work is all about discussing other people's work. And to me, then if I put too much stuff on top of that, it's taking away from the actual important thing. So I think the basic kind of editing operations, people might be surprised how quickly they could pick those up. So I would say, don't be afraid of it. The other thing in terms of how to do it is the first few videos I did were, I guess, what you call supercuts. So it's like where it's like a montage. You take a theme or an idea and you just put some clips together, sometimes with music underneath or sometimes with the audio from the clips. And I think those are actually quite good starting points because there's no writing then. Do you know what I mean? Like you literally take it away from the written word. You're almost saying to yourself, I'm going to make a video piece and it doesn't need any narration. It doesn't need any explanation. I don't need to say anything. Maybe you could put a title on it. So it says, this is now a montage about, I don't know, fights, car crashes in movies or whatever. But actually, even that would be very obvious after the first couple of scenes, probably. So for me, because I started that way, I think that's a good way to sort of build up your confidence to sort of do a video piece where the written word is actually not really necessary. And then you can start thinking visually rather than I have to explain this through writing. Of course, a lot of videos and a lot of my videos, they have a script or they have a narration or even if it's just text on the screen. And I think the more familiar you get with editing, you start to realize where you can cut down the script because the pictures and the sound are doing the job for you. I'm not a fan of this sort of video essays where the maker starts talking and they literally talk the entire way through the video, just explaining. Because, and this is just a personal feeling, but it's like, unless you can say something as interesting as the great filmmaker that you're doing, I don't really understand why you're there all the time. Of course, I make a lot of videos where I have quite a lot of script, but I always try, I think it's also about pace and rhythm and tone, where, I mean, if you go to the Kieślowski bit, there are whole sections where I'm saying nothing because and that's not just because, now Kieślowski's going to say something or Piesiewicz is going to say something. I want the films to say something. I want there to be this kind of variation so that it's not just this, like as if I'm giving a lecture on Kieślowski and I start and I just keep talking and I've got some nice pictures and then I finish. Oh, sorry. I think if you're going to make a video piece, part of the advantage is let the film talk as well, or the films talk as well. So I would also, if people do move into written video stuff, my advice would be try and see how little writing or narration you can do, but still make the points. Because if you are a writer, it's quite a big head transition to go from writing something to video. But so one way for me to do that would be almost, okay, like start with no words at all, make a montage type piece. And then if you're going to do something that needs a bit of script or narration, try and keep it to absolute minimum as you can and see where you go from there. And then of course it's always, some subjects need a lot more explanation. I mean, I can't remember how long my script is for the Kieślowski video, but it's quite, I think the video is about 11 minutes or so. There's probably a few pages in there of my, script. But I didn't want it to be the dominant part of the video, if you know what I mean. I want not just Kieślowski and Piesiewicz talking, but I want the films to be allowed to breathe, have room to breathe and to speak as well. Because the whole reason I'm doing this is because I'm saying you really need to watch these films. And if you've watched them, maybe rewatch them and think about some of these ideas. But if I'm just talking all the way through that, I don't think I'm doing the best job to kind of, promote the films, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think I said before about this beginning of your work when we see these, three movies put together. And I also remember how important for me was the essay from Cogonada about Italian neorealism.
Yeah.
Again, it was, it's so complex and simple, like in the same time, and putting the American version of the Sica's movie, Stazione Termini, with, the Italian, I would say original variant of this movie, and to see how, the time, how to sculpture in time, I would say, and this thing that you can see two things or three things, how in your case, it frees you. It's freedom. It's a new kind of freedom, and I guess that there are so many fantastic tools. You said that you don't like to put them too much. But I mean, even this, to do this, let the images speak, and then the filmmaker of the film essay needs to find, the right amount of time, how to show it, and I mean, it was really, your essay, this essay were really important for me. And I was also thinking that there's this, I guess, and now a change, that if Kogonada is invited to Cannes and he's like showing his work, I mean, are you feeling this too, that more places are open to go this way and to learn about it, to distribute that kind of materials, works?
Yeah, I think, in the last few years, this whole idea of video essay or, video making has just exploded, right? Because there now is the technology is so easily available, and the platform, the place to put the work is so accessible. I think like with anything then, it's like with music, once people could make music in their bedroom with a, computer program and stuff, obviously you get a lot of stuff that's not great, but you will also get a lot more people having the opportunity to make great stuff. And I mean, Kogonada is almost like the classic example, because he's moved. I mean, I was at Cannes and I saw his second feature. I thought it was very, very interesting. I really loved the first one as well. I mean, I don't say this too much because it can sound a little bit, arrogant and stuff. But ultimately, video essay making is filmmaking. It's not. It's missing usually. I mean, some people now film their own things for their video essays. In fact, I'm making something at the moment where I have to film certain things. But so if you take away the bit of actually making new images, like going out and filming new stuff, every other part is involved. The choice of music, the choice of text, the choice of font, special effects, and then obviously the editing itself, the pacing of something, the choice of shot, how you use it. So it doesn't surprise me that people like Kogonada, being the best example, who have made absolutely outstanding video essays, can make a film. Now, obviously, it's maybe arguably harder to make a feature than it is to make a 10-minute video or 20-minute video, and I understand that. But I think the basic principles of engaging with visual material and trying to, express it in a way that says what you want it to say, and using music to support that, or voice to support that, or, colors or whatever. This is filmmaking. And, I'm not at all claiming that most people like myself who make video essays are, anywhere near the level of the great, feature filmmakers. But we're doing a lot of the same process. And so I think that is an end goal for a lot of people who make this stuff. It's like, and obviously, Kogonada being very much at the forefront of that. But it wouldn't surprise me to see many more video essay makers, sort of moving into that world. I think maybe many more of them would go into sort of documentary and essay films, because there's more of a connection in terms of what you're doing with that. Now, he's obviously gone into features, and I'm sure others will follow. But to me, that I'm not saying it's the natural progression, but I can totally understand that is one path that you might go on, because this is like anytime I make something, it's like if you're a musician, you have to practice, right? You have to keep getting better at your instrument, or a painter, or anyone, whatever it is you do, you need to keep working at it. And so the more times I make a video piece, I hope the better I'm getting at it. And so then hopefully at some point you have the confidence to think, yeah, actually I could do a bigger project, or maybe even a fictional project, or, whatever. And so I think that's all part of the whole journey that you're on, hopefully, if you want to, stay in this sort of field.
Is there any chance that you will go back to Kieślowski again and find something, to create another amazing piece that we would project, on the screen of Kinoteatr Zdrowie, which is of Kieślowski's youth? And really, it was projected. It was there. It was in the cinema of Kieślowski's youth. There was your essay, and it was amazing. It was the opening night, first night of the festival, the big night, I would say. And if there's any chance that you go back to the filmmakers that you've already, somehow touched with your tools. And this is one question. And the last one is, what are you doing now? Who is your, maybe is a female director? I don't know. Like, who are you working on now?
I mean, to answer your first question, yeah, I mean, I would happily think about doing another piece on Kieślowski because he's such a rich filmmaker to explore. And, the Three Colors films, that's literally his last three films out of a career of, I don't know how many, 20 or something, or, many features. So there's obviously a huge number of more either types of film or a specific film to do something on. So yeah, I mean, of course, I would be interested. I think for me, it often starts with the idea. So when I had the idea of Three Colors, 25 years on, that was the hook for me. And I usually need to find something because, there's so many filmmakers I love. I would love to make something on, but then I need to have a really good, what I think of as a strong entry point, So I would have to, if I was going back to Kieślowski, I'd have to really look at all the films again and start thinking about what is it that, I think is worth exploring. But there's obviously so much more. And I'm sure many other people have made, really interesting videos on his work because there's so much to explore. In terms of other stuff, I think this is, for me, when I do something on a filmmaker, it really is often a sort of a discovery thing. So when I started the Three Colors Kieślowski video, there were many Kieślowski films I hadn't seen. I shouldn't really admit this, but I hadn't even seen the full Decalogue at the time. So I'd seen, obviously the two main ones, short film about killing and love, and I'd seen maybe one other or something. But then part of the making of that video is for me to then, it's a chance to then focus on that filmmaker and go more in depth with them. And so I watched a whole load more of his films that I hadn't seen. And that felt like important for me to then be able to talk about them and, trace where his films have changed. Because if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't be able to explain why I think, there's connections and differences. So when I do someone else, it's almost like this is my opportunity to do a deep dive into their career. And with some filmmakers, I did a video on Fellini last year. Now I'd seen several Fellini films, but there were several very important ones that I hadn't seen. So I used that as my opportunity to kind of go in there and then discuss how I felt things had changed or things that, repeated ideas. And I just did a video on Ingmar Bergman. So the BFI is doing a sort of series of box sets of his career. And the very first one they did were his very early films, like kind of the ones that are generally not considered his greatest films. So before he gets very, very, internationally famous. I hadn't seen any of those films. So this was an amazing opportunity. They asked me, would you like to do a video essay on this? And I was like, yeah, because then I got to watch these films. I then looked at them very carefully and tried to make connections to the films because I've seen a lot of Bergman films, the later ones, the famous ones. But it was amazing to see some of the ideas that were already present, or even some of the types of symbolism or, motifs and things like that. So I guess I use the video essay as my opportunity to really kind of go in depth on a filmmaker. And that's a really lovely thing to be able to do. I mean, you could do that as a journalist writing about them, of course. But for me, because I know I'm going to work with those films and edit with them, to actually watch them and make notes on them and start to look for connections and things, that's something I really enjoy. So the Kieślowski one was an amazing opportunity to kind of really get to know. I mean, I still haven't seen every single thing he's done, but I've now, I've seen the majority. Similarly now with Fellini and now with Bergman and stuff. So I kind of use them as opportunities to really like increase my own sort of knowledge of the filmmaker and start to, think about why I think they're important. So at the moment I'm doing a bunch of things. I'm doing not specific filmmakers at the moment. I'm doing sort of specific films or ideas. So I have a series on, there's a British film magazine called Little White Lies, and I do a series on sort of remakes for them, called Remake Remodel. So I take a film and then look at the remake and sort of compare them. And that's often very interesting, because if they were made at different time periods, you know, how they reflect the times that they were made, or, you know, what was changed, why was it changed, you know, are there things that are more interesting about the new one, or why did they get rid of that? So those are quite interesting for me, because it's not just about the aesthetics of the films, it's about often, like the most recent one I did was, there's a Dutch film, a thriller from the late 80s called The Vanishing, which very famously has one of the most like frightening endings to a movie ever. And actually, a lot of people watch it and say they don't ever want to see it again because it's so traumatic. And they made a remake only a few years later in America, and I won't spoil it, but the same guy, so the Dutch filmmaker, came from there and remade it, and he changed the ending. Now that to me is fascinating. It's like, why would you do that? Because that's the one thing everybody talks about with that movie. And he chose, you know, it's not like often you think, oh, Hollywood has taken it away and ruined it. But the same guy has come to America and changed the thing that everybody knows about the first film. So that was fascinating to explore, you know, what are the cultural things that go on there, and why would someone do it? And what happens if you change it? Maybe it could be better. Now, actually, it's much, much worse, but it was interesting to sort of examine that. So, you know, for me, there's endless stuff to do with video work, and I find it a really rewarding and very satisfying thing to do. So, yeah, I mean, you know, there's a bunch of projects I'm on, but, you know, one day would be lovely to return to Kieślowski. I don't know what I would do. I'd have to really have a good think about it. But with someone like him, there's always something else to say, because he's such an important and such a, you know, brilliant filmmaker.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for making such amazing works. And I really hope that we will meet soon in Poland. And really thank you for all this word of wisdom. And dziękuję. How is
Yeah, of course.
Dziękuję bardzo. And do zobaczenia. Or I would just, I mean, I need to see the one about Fellini, because I love also Italian cinema. So
I'll send you a link if you're interested. But yeah, it was fun to do. It was fun to do. But thank you. I mean, thanks for inviting me to talk about it. And it was lovely to see you again. And hopefully next time it won't be on a screen. We can actually meet in person.
Thank you. Thank you very much.